Father Goriot, Honor de Balzac. The Project Gutenberg e-book of Father Goriot, by Honor de Balzac. This e-book is for the use of anyone anywhere at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this e-book or online at www.gutenberg.net. Title: Father Goriot. Author: Honor de Balzac. Release date: October 6, 2004. Ebook 1237. Language: English. Character set encoding: ASCII. Start of this Project Gutenberg ebook. Father Goriot. Produced by Dagny. Father Goriot. By Honor de Balzac. Translated by Alan Marriage. Rash resolve. He did not know that Le Comte Maxime de Trailles would wait till he was insulted so as to fire first and kill his man. Eugene was a sportsman and a good shot, but he had not yet hit the bullseye 20 times out of 22. The young count dropped into a low chair by the hearth, took up the tongs, and made up the fire so violently and so sulkily that Anastasie's fair face suddenly clouded over. She turned to Eugene, with a cool, questioning glance that asked plainly, "Why do you not go?" A glance which well-bred people regard as a cue to make their exit. Eugene assumed an amiable expression. "Madam," he began, "I hastened to call upon you." He stopped short. The door opened, and the owner of the Tilbury suddenly appeared. He had left his hat outside, and did not greet the Countess. He looked meditatively at Rastignac, and held out his hand to Maxime with a cordial good morning that astonished Eugene not a little. The young provincial did not understand the amenities of a triple alliance. De Ristod, said the Countess, introducing her husband to the law student. Eugene bowed profoundly. "This gentleman," she continued, presenting Eugene to her husband, "is de Rastignac. He is related to me, la Vicomtesse de Beaucent, through the Marsiaux. I had the pleasure of meeting him at her last ball." Related to me, la Vicomtesse de Beaucent, through the Marsiaux. These words, on which the Countess threw ever so slight an emphasis, by reason of the pride that the mistress of a house takes in showing that she only receives people of distinction as visitors in her house, produced a magical effect. The Count's stiff manner relaxed at once as he returned the student's bow. "Delighted to have an opportunity of making your acquaintance," he said. Maxime de Trailles himself gave Eugene an uneasy glance, and suddenly dropped his insolent manner. The mighty name had all the power of a fairy's wand. Those closed compartments in the southern brain flew open again. Rastignac's carefully drilled faculties returned. It was as if a sudden light had pierced the obscurity of this upper world of Paris, and he began to see, though everything was indistinct as yet. Vauquer's lodging house and Father Goriot were very far remote from his thoughts. "I thought that the Marsiaux were extinct," the Comte de Ristod said, addressing Eugene. "Yes, they are extinct," answered the law student. "My great-uncle, the Chevalier de Rastignac, married the heiress of the Marsillac family. They had only one daughter, who married the Marechal de Clérimbault, de Beaucent's grandfather on the mother's side. We are the younger branch of the family, and the younger branch is all the poorer because my great-uncle, the Vice-Admiral, lost all that he had in the King's service. The government during the Revolution refused to admit our claims when the Compagnie d'Indes was liquidated. Was not your great-uncle in command of the Venger before 1789? Yes. Then he would be acquainted with my grandfather, who commanded the Warwick." Maxime looked at me, de Ristod, and shrugged his shoulders, as who should say, "If he is going to discuss nautical matters with that fellow, it is all over with us." Anastasie understood the glance that de Trailles gave her. With a woman's admirable tact, she began to smile and said, "Come with me, Maxime. I have something to say to you. We will leave you two gentlemen to sail in company on board the Warwick and the Venger." She rose to her feet and signed to Maxime to follow her, mirth and mischief in her whole attitude, and the two went in the direction of the boudoir. The morganatic couple, to use a convenient German expression which has no exact equivalent, had reached the door, when the Count interrupted himself in his talk with Eugene. "Anastasie," he cried pettishly, "just stay a moment, dear. You know very well that—" "I am coming back in a minute," she interrupted. "I have a commission for Maxime to execute, and I want to tell him about it." She came back almost immediately. She had noticed the inflection in her husband's voice, and knew that it would not be safe to retire to the boudoir. Like all women who are compelled to study their husbands' characters in order to have their own way, and whose business it is to know exactly how far they can go without endangering a good understanding, she was very careful to avoid petty collisions in domestic life. It was Eugene who had brought about this untoward incident. So the Countess looked at Maxime and indicated the law student with an air of exasperation. M.D. Trails addressed the Count, the Countess, and Eugene with the pointed remark, "You are busy, I do not want to interrupt you. Good day," and he went. "Just wait a moment, Maxime," the Count called after him. "Come and dine with us," said the Countess, leaving Eugene and her husband together once more. She followed Maxime into the little drawing room, where they sat together sufficiently long to feel sure that Rastignac had taken his leave. The law student heard their laughter, and their voices, and the pauses in their talk. He grew malicious, exerted his conversational powers for M.D. Ristod, flattered him, and drew him into discussions, to the end that he might see the Countess again and discover the nature of her relations with Father Goriot. This Countess with a husband and a lover, for Maxime clearly was her lover, was a mystery. What was the secret tie that bound her to the old tradesman? This mystery he meant to penetrate, hoping by its means to gain a sovereign ascendancy over this fair typical Parisian. Anastasie. The Count called again to his wife. "Poor Maxime," she said, addressing the young man. "Come, we must resign ourselves. This evening. I hope, Nasie," he said in her ear, "that you will give orders not to admit that youngster, whose eyes light up like live coals when he looks at you. He will make you a declaration, and compromise you, and then you will compel me to kill him." "Are you mad, Maxime?" she said. "A young lad of a student is, on the contrary, a capital lightning conductor. Is not that so? Of course, I mean to make Ristod furiously jealous of him." Maxime burst out laughing, and went out, followed by the Countess, who stood at the window to watch him into his carriage. He shook his whip, and made his horse prance. She only returned when the great gate had been closed after him. "What do you think, dear?" cried the Count, her husband. "This gentleman's family estate is not far from Vertul, on the Charente. His great-uncle and my grandfather were acquainted." "Delighted to find that we have acquaintances in common," said the Countess, with a preoccupied manner. "More than you think," said Eugene, in a low voice. "What do you mean?" she asked quickly. "Why, only just now," said the student, "I saw a gentleman go out at the gate, Father Goriot, my next-door neighbor in the house where I am lodging." At the sound of this name, and the prefix that embellished it, the Count, who was stirring the fire, let the tongues fall as though they had burned his fingers, and rose to his feet. "Sir," he cried, "you might have called him Monsieur Goriot." The Countess turned pale at first at the sight of her husband's vexation, then she reddened. Clearly she was embarrassed. Her answer was made in a tone that she tried to make natural, and with an air of assumed carelessness. "You could not know anyone who is dearer to us both." She broke off, glanced at the piano as if some fancy had crossed her mind, and asked, "Are you fond of music, M.D. Rastignac?" "Exceedingly," answered Eugene, flushing, and disconcerted by a dim suspicion that he had somehow been guilty of a clumsy piece of folly. "Do you sing?" she cried, going to the piano, and sitting down before it. She swept her fingers over the keyboard from end to end. "Ra. No, madam." The Comte de Ristod walked to and fro. "That is a pity. You are without one great means of success." "Caro, non dubitare," sang the Countess. Eugene had a second time waved a magic wand when he uttered Goriot's name, but the effect seemed to be entirely opposite to that produced by the formula related to me, de Beaucent. His position was not unlike that of some visitor permitted as a favor to inspect a private collection of curiosities, when by inadvertence he comes into collision with a glass case full of sculptured figures, and 3 or 4 heads, imperfectly secured, fall at the shock. He wished the earth would open and swallow him. M.D. Ristod's expression was reserved and chilly. Her eyes had grown indifferent, and sedulously avoided meeting those of the unlucky student of law. "Madam," he said, "you wish to talk with M.D. Ristod. Permit me to wish you good day." The Countess interrupted him by a gesture, saying hastily, "Whenever you come to see us, both M.D. Ristod and I shall be delighted to see you." Eugene made a profound bow and took his leave, followed by M.D. Ristod, who insisted, in spite of his remonstrances, on accompanying him into the hall. "Neither your mistress nor I are at home to that gentleman when he calls," the Count said to Maurice. As Eugene set foot on the steps, he saw that it was raining. "Come," said he to himself, "somehow I have just made a mess of it, I do not know how. And now I am going to spoil my hat and coat into the bargain. I ought to stop in my corner, grind away at law, and never look to be anything but a boorish country magistrate. How can I go into society, when to manage properly you want a lot of cabs, varnished boots, gold watch chains, and all sorts of things? You have to wear white duskin gloves that cost 6 francs in the morning, and primrose kid gloves every evening. A fig for that old humbug of a Goriot. When he reached the street door, the driver of a hackney coach, who had probably just deposited a wedding party at their door, and asked nothing better than a chance of making a little money for himself without his employer's knowledge, saw that Eugene had no umbrella, remarked his black coat, white waistcoat, yellow gloves, and varnished boots, and stopped and looked at him inquiringly. Eugene, in the blind desperation that drives a young man to plunge deeper and deeper into an abyss, as if he might hope to find a fortunate issue in its lowest depths, nodded in reply to the driver's signal, and stepped into the cab. A few stray petals of orange blossom and scraps of wire bore witness to its recent occupation by a wedding party. "Where am I to drive, sir?" demanded the man, who, by this time, had taken off his white gloves. "Confound it," Eugene said to himself, "I am in for it now, and at least I will not spend cab hire for nothing. Drive to the hotel, bossant," he said aloud. "Which?" asked the man, a portentous word that reduced Eugene to confusion. This young man of fashion, species insert, did not know that there were two hotels, bossant. He was not aware how rich he was in relations who did not care about him. "The Vicomte de Bossant, Rue de Grenelle," interrupted the driver, with a jerk of his head. "You see, there are the hotels of the Marquis and Comte de Bossant in the Rue Saint-Dominique," he added, drawing up the step. "I know all about that," said Eugene, severely. "Everybody is laughing at me today, it seems," he said to himself, as he deposited his hat on the opposite seat. "This escapade will cost me a king's ransom, but, at any rate, I shall call on my so-called cousin in a thoroughly aristocratic fashion. Goriot has cost me 10 francs already, the old scoundrel. My word. I will tell de Bossant about my adventure. Perhaps it may amuse her. Doubtless she will know the secret of the criminal relation between that handsome woman and the old rat without a tail. It would be better to find favor in my cousin's eyes than to come in contact with that shameless woman, who seems to me to have very expensive tastes. Surely the beautiful Vicomtesse's personal interest would turn the scale for me, when the mere mention of her name produces such an effect. Let us look higher. If you set yourself to carry the heights of heaven, you must face God." The innumerable thoughts that surged through his brain might be summed up in these phrases. He grew calmer, and recovered something of his assurance as he watched the falling rain. He told himself that though he was about to squander 2 of the precious 5-franc pieces that remained to him, the money was well laid out in preserving his coat, boots, and hat. And his cabman's cry of "Gate, if you please," almost put him in spirits. A Swiss, in scarlet and gold, appeared. The great door groaned on its hinges, and Rastignac, with sweet satisfaction, beheld his equipage pass under the archway and stop before the flight of steps beneath the awning. The driver, in a blue and red greatcoat, dismounted and let down the step. As Eugene stepped out of the cab, he heard smothered laughter from the peristyle. 3 or 4 lackeys were making merry over the festal appearance of the vehicle. In another moment the law student was enlightened as to the cause of their hilarity. He felt the full force of the contrast between his equipage and one of the smartest broughams in Paris. A coachman, with powdered hair, seemed to find it difficult to hold a pair of spirited horses, who stood chafing the bit. In de Ristod's courtyard, in the Chaussee d'Antin, he had seen the neat turnout of a young man of 26. In the Faubourg Saint-Germain he found the luxurious equipage of a man of rank. 30,000 francs would not have purchased it. "Who can be here?" said Eugene to himself. He began to understand, though somewhat tardily, that he must not expect to find many women in Paris who were not already appropriated, and that the capture of one of these queens would be likely to cost something more than bloodshed. "Confound it all. I expect my cousin also has her Maxime." He went up the steps, feeling that he was a blighted being. The glass door was opened for him. The servants were as solemn as jackasses under the currycomb. So far, Eugene had only been in the ballroom on the ground floor of the Hotel Bossant. The fate had followed so closely on the invitation that he had not had time to call on his cousin, and had therefore never seen de Bossant's apartments. He was about to behold for the first time a great lady among the wonderful and elegant surroundings that reveal her character and reflect her daily life. He was the more curious, because de Ristod's drawing room had provided him with a standard of comparison. At 4:30 the Vicomtesse de Bossant was visible. 5 minutes earlier she would not have received her cousin, but Eugene knew nothing of the recognized routine of various houses in Paris. He was conducted up the wide, white-painted, crimson-carpeted staircase, between the gilded balusters and masses of flowering plants, to de Bossant's apartments. He did not know the rumor current about de Bossant, one of the biographies told, with variations, in whispers, every evening in the salons of Paris. For 3 years past her name had been spoken of in connection with that of one of the most wealthy and distinguished Portuguese nobles, the Marquis de Ajuda Pinto. It was one of those innocent liaisons which possess so much charm for the two thus attached to each other that they find the presence of a third person intolerable. The Vicomte de Beaucent, therefore, had himself set an example to the rest of the world by respecting, with as good a grace as might be, this morganatic union. Anyone who came to call on the Vicomtesse in the early days of this friendship was sure to find the Marquis de Ajuda Pinto there. As under the circumstances Miss de Beaucent could not very well shut her door against these visitors, she gave them such a cold reception, and showed so much interest in the study of the ceiling, that no one could fail to understand how much he bored her. And when it became known in Paris that Miss de Beaucent was bored by callers between 2 and 4 o'clock, she was left in perfect solitude during that interval. She went to the Fonte or to the opera with M. de Beaucent and M. de Ajuda Pinto. And M. de Beaucent, like a well-bred man of the world, always left his wife and the Portuguese as soon as he had installed them. But M. de Ajuda Pinto must marry, and M. de Roquefort was the young lady. In the whole fashionable world there was but one person who as yet knew nothing of the arrangement, and that was Miss de Beaucent. Some of her friends had hinted at the possibility, and she had laughed at them, believing that envy had prompted those ladies to try to make mischief. And now, though the bans were about to be published, and although the handsome Portuguese had come that day to break the news to the Vicomtesse, he had not found courage as yet to say one word about his treachery. How was it? Nothing is doubtless more difficult than the notification of an ultimatum of this kind. There are men who feel more at their ease when they stand up before another man who threatens their lives with sword or pistol than in the presence of a woman who, after 2 hours of lamentations and reproaches, falls into a dead swoon and requires salts. At this moment, therefore, M. de Ajuda Pinto was on thorns, and anxious to take his leave. He told himself that in some way or other the news would reach Miss de Beaucent. He would write. It would be much better to do it by letter, and not to utter the words that should stab her to the heart. So when the servant announced M. Eugene de Rastignac, the Marquis de Ajuda Pinto trembled with joy. To be sure, a loving woman shows even more ingenuity in inventing doubts of her lover than in varying the monotony of his happiness. And when she is about to be forsaken, she instinctively interprets every gesture as rapidly as Virgil's courser detected the presence of his companion by snuffing the breeze. It was impossible, therefore, that Miss de Beaucent should not detect that involuntary thrill of satisfaction. Slight though it was appalling in its artlessness. Eugene had yet to learn that no one in Paris should present himself in any house without first making himself acquainted with the whole history of its owner, and of its owner's wife and family, so that he may avoid making any of the terrible blunders which in Poland draw forth the picturesque exclamation, "Harness 5 bullocks to your cart." Probably because you will need them all to pull you out of the quagmire into which a false step has plunged you. If, down to the present day, our language has no name for these conversational disasters, it is probably because they are believed to be impossible. The publicity given in Paris to every scandal is so prodigious. After the awkward incident at Miss de Ristod's, no one but Eugene could have reappeared in his character of bullock driver in Miss de Beaucent's drawing room. But if Miss de Ristod and M. de Trailles had found him horribly in the way, M. de Ajuda hailed his coming with relief. "Goodbye," said the Portuguese, hurrying to the door, as Eugene made his entrance into a dainty little pink and grey drawing room, where luxury seemed nothing more than good taste. "Until this evening," said Miss de Beaucent, turning her head to give the Marquis a glance. "We are going to the Fonte, are we not?" "I cannot go," he said, with his fingers on the door handle. Miss de Beaucent rose and beckoned to him to return. She did not pay the slightest attention to Eugene, who stood there dazzled by the sparkling marvels around him. He began to think that this was some story out of the Arabian Nights made real, and did not know where to hide himself, when the woman before him seemed to be unconscious of his existence. The Vicomtesse had raised the forefinger of her right hand, and gracefully signed to the Marquis to seat himself beside her. The Marquis felt the imperious sway of passion in her gesture. He came back towards her. Eugene watched him, not without a feeling of envy. "That is the owner of the brougham," he said to himself. "But is it necessary to have a pair of spirited horses, servants in livery, and torrents of gold to draw a glance from a woman here in Paris?" The demon of luxury gnawed at his heart, greed burned in his veins, his throat was parched with the thirst of gold. He had 130 francs every quarter. His father, mother, brothers, sisters, and aunt did not spend 200 francs a month among them. This swift comparison between his present condition and the aims he had in view helped to benumb his faculties. "Why not?" the Vicomtesse was saying, as she smiled at the Portuguese. "Why cannot you come to the Italians' affairs? I am to dine with the English ambassador. Throw him over." When a man once enters on a course of deception, he is compelled to add lie to lie. Diajuda therefore said, smiling, "Do you lay your commands on me?" "Yes, certainly. That was what I wanted to have you say to me," he answered, dissembling his feelings in a glance which would have reassured any other woman. He took the Vicomtesse's hand, kissed it, and went. Eugene ran his fingers through his hair, and constrained himself to bow. He thought that now de Beausant would give him her attention. But suddenly she sprang forward, rushed to a window in the gallery, and watched Diajuda step into his carriage. She listened to the order that he gave, and heard the Swiss repeat it to the coachman. "To de Roquefid's house." Those words, and the way in which Diajuda flung himself back in the carriage, were like a lightning flash and a thunderbolt for her. She walked back again with a deadly fear gnawing at her heart. The most terrible catastrophes only happen among the heights. The Vicomtesse went to her own room, sat down at a table, and took up a sheet of dainty note paper. When, instead of dining with the English ambassador, she wrote, "You go to the Roquefides, you owe me an explanation, which I am waiting to hear." She retraced several of the letters, for her hand was trembling so that they were indistinct. Then she signed the note with an initial C for Claire de Bourgogne and rang the bell. "Jacques," she said to the servant, who appeared immediately, "take this note to de Roquefide's house at 7:30 and ask for the Marquis Diajuda. If Diajuda is there, leave the note without waiting for an answer. If he is not there, bring the note back to me. Madame la Vicomtesse, there is a visitor in the drawing room." "Oh, yes, of course," she said, opening the door. Eugene was beginning to feel very uncomfortable, but at last the Vicomtesse appeared. She spoke to him, and the tremulous tones of her voice vibrated through his heart. "Pardon me, monsieur," she said. "I had a letter to write. Now I am quite at liberty." She scarcely knew what she was saying, for even as she spoke she thought, "Oh, he means to marry Mlle de Roquefide. But is he still free? This evening the marriage shall be broken off, or else. But before tomorrow I shall know." "Cousin," the student replied. Said the Countess, with an insolent glance that sent a cold shudder through Eugene. He understood what that meant. He had learned a great deal in 3 hours, and his wits were on the alert. He reddened. "Madam," he began. He hesitated a moment, and then went on. "Pardon me. I am in such need of protection that the nearest scrap of relationship could do me no harm." De Beausant smiled, but there was sadness in her smile. Even now she felt forebodings of the coming pain. The air she breathed was heavy with the storm that was about to burst. "If you knew how my family are situated," he went on, "you would love to play the part of a beneficent fairy godmother who graciously clears the obstacles from the path of her protégé." "Well, cousin," she said, laughing, "and how can I be of service to you? But do I know even that? I am distantly related to you, and this obscure and remote relationship is even now a perfect godsend to me. You have confused my ideas. I cannot remember the things that I meant to say to you. I know no one else here in Paris. Oh, if I could only ask you to counsel me, ask you to look upon me as a poor child who would fain cling to the hem of your dress, who would lay down his life for you. Would you kill a man for me?" "Too," said Eugene. "You, child." "Yes, you are a child," she said, keeping back the tears that came to her eyes. "You would love sincerely." "Oh," he cried, flinging up his head. The audacity of the student's answer interested the Vicomtesse in him. The southern brain was beginning to scheme for the first time. Between de Ristod's blue boudoir and de Beausant's rose-colored drawing room he had made a 3 years advance in a kind of law which is not a recognized study in Paris, although it is a sort of higher jurisprudence, and, when well understood, is a high road to success of every kind. "Oh, that is what I meant to say," said Eugene. "I met de Ristod at your ball, and this morning I went to see her." "You must have been very much in the way," said de Beausant, smiling as she spoke. "Yes, indeed. I am a novice, and my blunders will set everyone against me if you do not give me your counsel. I believe that in Paris it is very difficult to meet with a young, beautiful, and wealthy woman of fashion who would be willing to teach me what you women can explain so well, life. I shall find de trails everywhere. So I have come to you to ask you to give me a key to a puzzle, to entreat you to tell me what sort of blunder I made this morning. I mentioned an old man." Madame la Duchesse de Langues cut the student short. Eugene gave expression to his intense annoyance by a gesture. If you mean to succeed, said the Vicomtesse in a low voice, in the first place you must not be so demonstrative. Oh, good morning, dear, she continued, and rising and crossing the room, she grasped the Duchess' hands as affectionately as if they had been sisters. The Duchess responded in the prettiest and most gracious way. Two intimate friends, said Rastignac to himself. Henceforward I shall have two protectresses. Those two women are great friends, no doubt, and this newcomer will doubtless interest herself in her friend's cousin. To what happy inspiration do I owe this piece of good fortune, dear Antoinette? Asked me, de Beaucent. Well, I saw M.D. Ajuda Pinto at M.D. Roquefide's door, so I thought that if I came I should find you alone. Me, de Beaucent's mouth did not tighten, her color did not rise, her expression did not alter, or rather, her brow seemed to clear as the Duchess uttered those deadly words. If I had known that you were engaged, the speaker added, glancing at Eugene. This gentleman is Eugene de Rastignac, one of my cousins, said the Vicomtesse. Have you any news of General de Montrevaux? She continued. Srazy told me yesterday that he never goes anywhere now. Has he been to see you today? It was believed that the Duchess was desperately in love with de Montrevaux, and that he was a faithless lover. She felt the question in her very heart, and her face flushed as she answered. He was at the Elysee yesterday, in attendance. Claire, returned the Duchess, and hatred overflowed in the glances she threw at me, de Beaucent. Of course you know that M.D. Ajuda Pinto is going to marry Mlle. de Roquefide. The bans will be published tomorrow. This thrust was too cruel. The Vicomtesse's face grew white, but she answered, laughing, one of those rumors that fools amuse themselves with. What should induce M.D. Ajuda to take one of the noblest names in Portugal to the Roquefides? The Roquefides were only ennobled yesterday. But Bertha will have 200,000 livres a year, they say. M.D. Ajuda is too wealthy to marry for money. But my dear, Mlle. de Roquefide is a charming girl, indeed. And, as a matter of fact, he is dining with them today. The thing is settled. It is very surprising to me that you should know so little about it. Me, de Beaucent turned to Rastignac. What was the blunder that you made, monsieur? She asked. The poor boy is only just launched into the world, Antoinette, so that he understands nothing of all this that we are speaking of. Be merciful to him, and let us finish our talk tomorrow. Everything will be announced tomorrow, you know, and your kind informal communication can be accompanied by official confirmation. The Duchess gave Eugene one of those insolent glances that measure a man from head to foot, and leave him crushed and annihilated. Madam, I have unwittingly plunged a dagger into me, de Ristod's heart. Unwittingly, therein lies my offense, said the student of law, whose keen brain had served him sufficiently well, for he had detected the biting epigrams that lurked beneath this friendly talk. You continue to receive, possibly you fear, those who know the amount of pain that they deliberately inflict. But a clumsy blunderer who has no idea how deeply he wounds is looked upon as a fool who does not know how to make use of his opportunities, and everyone despises him. Me, de Beaucent gave the student a glance, one of those glances in which a great soul can mingle dignity and gratitude. It was like balm to the law student, who was still smarting under the Duchess' insolent scrutiny. She had looked at him as an auctioneer might look at some article to appraise its value. Imagine, too, that I had just made some progress with the Comte de Ristod. For I should tell you, madam, he went on, turning to the Duchess with a mixture of humility and malice in his manner, that as yet I am only a poor devil of a student, very much alone in the world, and very poor. You should not tell us that, de Rastignac. We women never care about anything that no one else will take. Bah, said Eugene. I am only 22, and I must make up my mind to the drawbacks of my time of life. Besides, I am confessing my sins, and it would be impossible to kneel in a more charming confessional. You commit your sins in one drawing room, and receive absolution for them in another. The Duchess' expression grew colder. She did not like the flippant tone of these remarks, and showed that she considered them to be in bad taste by turning to the Vicomtesse with "This gentleman has only just come." Me, de Beaucent began to laugh outright at her cousin and at the Duchess both. He has only just come to Paris, dear, and is in search of someone who will give him lessons in good taste. Me, la Duchess, said Eugene, is it not natural to wish to be initiated into the mysteries which charm us? Come, now, he said to himself, my language is superfinely elegant, I'm sure. But me, de Ristod is herself, I believe, de Trail's pupil, said the Duchess. Of that I had no idea, madam, answered the law student, so I rashly came between them. In fact, I got on very well with the lady's husband, and his wife tolerated me for a time until I took it into my head to tell them that I knew someone of whom I had just caught a glimpse as he went out by a back staircase, a man who had given the Countess a kiss at the end of a passage. Who was it? Both women asked together. An old man who lives at the rate of 2 louis a month in the Faubourg Saint-Marceau, where I, a poor student, lodge likewise. He is a truly unfortunate creature. Everybody laughs at him. We all call him Father Goriot. Why, child, that you are, cried the Vicomtesse. Me, Ristod was a bull. Goriot, the daughter of a vermicelli manufacturer, the Duchess added. And when the little creature went to court, the daughter of a pastry cook was presented on the same day. Do you remember, Claire? The king began to laugh, and made some joke in Latin about flour. People, what was it, people? It just for said Eugene. Yes, that was it, said the Duchess. Oh, is that her father? The law student continued, aghast. Yes, certainly. The old man had 2 daughters. He dotes on them, so to speak, though they will scarcely acknowledge him. Didn't the second daughter marry a banker with a German name? The Vicomtesse asked, turning to me. De Langeais, a Baron de Nucingen. And her name is Delphine, is it not? Isn't she a fair-haired woman who has a side box at the opera? She comes sometimes to the Fonte and laughs loudly to attract attention. The Duchess smiled and said, I wonder at you, dear. Why do you take so much interest in people of that kind? One must have been as madly in love as Ristod was, to be infatuated with bull, Anastasie and her flour sacks. Oh, he will not find her a good bargain. She is in M.D. Trail's hands, and he will ruin her. And they do not acknowledge their father, Eugene repeated. Oh, well, yes, their father, a father, replied the Vicomtesse, a kind father who gave them each 500,000 or 600,000 francs, it is said, to secure their happiness by marrying them well, while he only kept 8,000 or 10,000 livres a year for himself, thinking that his daughters would always be his daughters, thinking that in them he would live his life twice over again, that in their houses he should find 2 homes, where he would be loved and looked up to, and made much of. And in 2 years' time both his sons-in-law had turned him out of their houses as if he were one of the lowest outcasts. Tears came into Eugene's eyes. He was still under the spell of youthful beliefs. He had just left home. Pure and sacred feelings had been stirred within him, and this was his first day on the battlefield of civilization in Paris. Genuine feeling is so infectious that for a moment the 3 looked at each other in silence. Mon Dieu, said me, de Langeais. Yes, it seems very horrible, and yet we see such things every day. Is there not a reason for it? Tell me, dear, have you ever really thought what a son-in-law is? A son-in-law is the man for whom we bring up you and I, a dear little one, bound to us very closely in innumerable ways. For 17 years she will be the joy of her family, its white soul as Lamartine says, and suddenly she will become its scourge. When he comes and takes her from us, his love from the very beginning is like an axe laid to the root of all the old affection in our darling's heart, and all the ties that bound her to her family are severed. But yesterday our little daughter thought of no one but her mother and father, as we had no thought that was not for her. By tomorrow she will have become a hostile stranger. The tragedy is always going on under our eyes. On the one hand you see a father who has sacrificed himself to his son, and his daughter-in-law shows him the last degree of insolence. On the other hand, it is the son-in-law who turns his wife's mother out of the house. I sometimes hear it said that there is nothing dramatic about society in these days. But the drama of the son-in-law is appalling, to say nothing of our marriages, which have come to be very poor farces. I can explain how it all came about in the old vermicelli maker's case. I think I recollect that Goriot, madam. Yes, that Goriot was once president of his section during the revolution. He was in the secret of the famous scarcity of grain, and laid the foundation of his fortune in those days by selling flour for 10 times its cost. He had as much flour as he wanted. My grandmother's steward sold him immense quantities. No doubt Goriot shared the plunder with the Committee of Public Salvation, as that sort of person always did. I recollect the steward telling my grandmother that she might live at Grandvillars in complete security, because her corn was as good as a certificate of civism. Well, then, this Goriot, who sold corn to those butchers, has never had but one passion. They say he idolizes his daughters. He settled one of them under Ristod's roof, and grafted the other into the Nucingen family tree, the Baron de Nucingen being a rich banker who had turned royalist. You can quite understand that so long as Bonaparte was emperor, the 2 sons-in-law could manage to put up with the old 93. But after the restoration of the Bourbons, M.D. Ristod felt bored by the old man's society, and the banker was still more tired of it. His daughters were still fond of him. They wanted to keep the goat and the cabbage, so they used to see Goriot whenever there was no one there, under pretense of affection. "Come today, Papa, we shall have you all to ourselves, and that will be much nicer," and all that sort of thing. As for me, dear, I believe that love has second sight. Poor 93. His heart must have bled. He saw that his daughters were ashamed of him, that if they loved their husbands his visits must make mischief. So he immolated himself. He made the sacrifice because he was a father. He went into voluntary exile. His daughters were satisfied, so he thought that he had done the best thing he could. But it was a family crime, and father and daughters were accomplices. You see this sort of thing everywhere. What could this old Goriot have been but a splash of mud in his daughters' drawing rooms? He would only have been in the way and bored other people, besides being bored himself. And this that happened between father and daughters may happen to the prettiest woman in Paris and the man she loves the best. If her love grows tiresome, he will go. He will descend to the basest trickery to leave her. It is the same with all love and friendship. Our heart is a treasury. If you pour out all its wealth at once, you are bankrupt. We show no more mercy to the affection that reveals its utmost extent than we do to another kind of prodigal who has not a penny left. Their father had given them all he had. For 20 years he had given his whole heart to them. Then, one day, he gave them all his fortune too. The lemon was squeezed. The girls left the rest in the gutter. "The world is very base," said the Vicomtesse, plucking at the threads of her shawl. She did not raise her head as she spoke. The words that M.D. Landis had meant for her in the course of her story had cut her to the quick. "Base? Oh, no," answered the Duchess. "The world goes its own way. That is all. If I speak in this way, it is only to show that I am not duped by it." "I think as you do," she said, pressing the Vicomtesse's hand. "The world is a slough. Let us try to live on the heights above it." She rose to her feet and kissed M.D. Beaucent on the forehead as she said, "You look very charming today, dear. I have never seen such a lovely color in your cheeks before." Then she went out with a slight inclination of the head to the cousin. "Father Goriot is sublime," said Eugene to himself, as he remembered how he had watched his neighbor work the silver vessel into a shapeless mass that night. M.D. Beaucent did not hear him. She was absorbed in her own thoughts. For several minutes the silence remained unbroken till the law student became almost paralyzed with embarrassment, and was equally afraid to go or stay or speak a word. "The world is basely ungrateful and ill-natured," said the Vicomtesse at last. "No sooner does a trouble befall you than a friend is ready to bring the tidings and to probe your heart with the point of a dagger while calling on you to admire the handle. Epigrams and sarcasms already. Oh, I will defend myself." She raised her head like the great lady that she was, and lightnings flashed from her proud eyes. "Oh," she said, as she saw Eugene, "are you there?" "Still," he said piteously. "Well, then, M.D. Rastignac, deal with the world as it deserves. You are determined to succeed. I will help you. You shall sound the depths of corruption in woman. You shall measure the extent of man's pitiful vanity. Deeply as I am versed in such learning, there were pages in the book of life that I had not read. Now I know all. The more cold-blooded your calculations, the further you will go. Strike ruthlessly. You will be feared. Men and women for you must be nothing more than post horses. Take a fresh relay, and leave the last to drop by the roadside. In this way you will reach the goal of your ambition. You will be nothing here, you see, unless a woman interests herself in you. And she must be young and wealthy, and a woman of the world. Yet, if you have a heart, lock it carefully away like a treasure. Do not let anyone suspect it, or you will be lost. You would cease to be the executioner, you would take the victim's place. And if ever you should love, never let your secret escape you. Trust no one until you are very sure of the heart to which you open your heart. Learn to mistrust everyone. Take every precaution for the sake of the love which does not exist as yet. Listen, Miguel." The name slipped from her so naturally that she did not notice her mistake. "There is something still more appalling than the ingratitude of daughters who have cast off their old father and wish that he were dead, and that is a rivalry between two sisters. Ristod comes of a good family, his wife has been received into their circle. She has been presented at court. And her sister, her wealthy sister, Delphine de Nucingen, the wife of a great capitalist, is consumed with envy and ready to die of spleen. There is gulf set between the sisters. Indeed, they are sisters no longer. The two women who refuse to acknowledge their father do not acknowledge each other. So me, de Nucingen would lap up all the mud that lies between the Rue Saint-Lazare and the Rue de Grenelle to gain admittance to my salon. She fancied that she should gain her end through de Mars. She has made herself de Mars's slave, and she bores him. De Mars cares very little about her. If you will introduce her to me, you will be her darling, her Benjamin. She will idolize you. If, after that, you can love her, do so. If not, make her useful. I will ask her to come once or twice to one of my great crushes, but I will never receive her here in the morning. I will bow to her when I see her, and that will be quite sufficient. You have shut the Comtesse de Ristod's door against you by mentioning Father Goriot's name. Yes, my good friend, you may call at her house 20 times, and every time out of the 20 you will find that she is not at home. The servants have their orders, and will not admit you. Very well, then, now let Father Goriot gain the right of entry into her sister's house for you. The beautiful me, de Nucingen, will give the signal for a battle. As soon as she singles you out, other women will begin to lose their heads about you, and her enemies and rivals and intimate friends will all try to take you from her. There are women who will fall in love with a man because another woman has chosen him. Like the city madams, poor things, who copy our millinery and hope thereby to acquire our manners. You will have a success, and in Paris success is everything. It is the key of power. If the women credit you with wit and talent, the men will follow suit so long as you do not undeceive them yourself. There will be nothing you may not aspire to. You will go everywhere, and you will find out what the world is, an assemblage of fools and knaves. But you must be neither the one nor the other. I am giving you my name like Ariadne's clue of thread to take with you into the labyrinth. Make no unworthy use of it, she said, with a queenly glance and curve of her throat. Give it back to me unsullied. And now, go. Leave me. We women also have our battles to fight. And if you should ever need someone who would gladly set a match to a train for you, well, she asked,